The old folk of Iliara said the valley fit inside a cupped hand of the heavens, and that was why the stars poured themselves so generously into the village lanterns. No matter how many times Kessa heard the saying, the notion still thrilled her. On clear nights, the constellations bent close, their icy sparks drifting downward like pollen, gathering in the colored glass spheres that swung from each lintel and gate. At dawn, the lanterns dimmed, as though sleeping, but in Iliara, everyone knew they were only storing what they had caught. When hard days came, failures of harvest, floods, fevers, the lanterns were opened and let loose a glow that steadied hearts and reminded people how widely the sky watched over them. Being lantern keeper was a rotating duty, and the villagers entrusted it to anyone nimble enough to climb the startle the stars, and gentle enough not to startle the stars. This winter, the post had fallen to 19-year-old Kessa Coppervein, who had both traits in abundance. Each evening, she roamed the lanes with an oilskin satchel of spare wicks and polished hooks, checking for cracks in the globes and making certain no one had forgotten to raise theirs into view of the midnight firmament. She relished the silent hours when the world stood between frost and dreaming. She felt as much custodian of wonder as of glass and wick. Only one house resisted the rhythm. It belonged to Moss Weaver, the village tailor, and lately its shutters stayed locked long after sunset. Tomas had buried his wife and infant daughter in the autumn just gone when a red cough stormed through Iliara. Since then, the man lived in gray hush, refusing company, refusing food some days, and, most troubling of all, refusing to hoist his lantern. Kessa had tried twice to knock, carrying bread or broth, but Tomas answered with a polite murmur that meant, "Leave me alone." The third time she arrived, she found the lantern still soot-grimed from summer dust, resting on its bracket like an unplayed instrument. That was the afternoon the alderman announced word of a coming dark. A total eclipse, they said, an hour when the sun would abandon the sky and a cold, false night would press down upon the valley. No one in living memory had faced such darkness. The lanterns would be called on all at once, opened in the square so their stored starlight could flood the eclipse's shadow. People trusted the ritual. Even so, foreboding rode the streets like smoke. Kessa noted how many glances flicked toward Tomas's silent windows. The valley needed every lantern bright, especially on the day hope itself might falter. That evening, after trimming wicks on the millhouse stair and mending a hairline crack in the apothecary's globe, Kessa stood before Tomas's gate. Clouds muscled across a silvered moon, and lamplight from neighboring cottages drew pools of ochre on the packed earth path. She inhaled the snow-bright air, then rapped 3 times. The door creaked open, half an eye's width. Tomas's face appeared, haggard as old bark. "I know you've come about the lantern," he said before she could speak. "I have," Kessa admitted. "The eclipse is 3 nights away. We'll need every star we can gather. I can't—" His throat bobbed. "I'm sorry, child. I can't bear to raise it. My girl's hands once steadied that rope." "Then let mine steady it for you," she said gently. "Let me keep your lantern till the darkness passes. I'll guard its light. And when the sun returns, I'll hang it back exactly as it was." Thomas's gaze drifted over her shoulder to the sky, where Orion's belt was kindling. "You do that?" "Yes." His fingers loosened from the edge of the door. After a small eternity, he fetched the globe, wrapped in a linen swaddling cloth. Kessa cradled it, feeling the cold ridges of its etched glass. Inside lay only a single pulse of pale fire, so little compared to other lanterns already sugar-bright from recent nights. She promised herself she would fatten it with stars before the eclipse. She spent the next 2 nights in tireless circuit, raising and lowering ladders, singing under her breath to coax the heavens closer. The village rooftops gleamed with frost, and her breath tangled with moonbeams as she worked. Tomas's lantern she positioned at the peak of the abandoned bell tower, highest spot in the valley where no eave or chimney could shadow it. Each hour she climbed to polish away ice and watch the starlight trickle into the waiting globe until it shimmered like a pearl in the dark. On the second night, a rumor reached her by way of the baker's apprentice. Star thieves had been spotted in the northern passes. Some claimed the thieves melted lantern glass into bottled wishes to sell in distant capitals. Kessa pictured rough hands wrenching the bell tower rope, dashing Tomas's fragile hope across stone, and her heart hammered. She petitioned the alderman for a sentry, but all able bodies were harvesting extra firewood for households with the elderly. So Kessa resolved to keep vigil alone. The night before the eclipse opened black and brittle, no wind, no owl calls. The hush felt less like peace than calculation. Kessa lit no torch as she scaled the bell tower, preferring the cover of darkness. She tucked herself among the rafters beside Tomas's lantern, listening. Minutes blurred into hours. Once she thought she heard boot leathers scuff cobbles below. Once she felt a quiver travel the rope. But dawn eventually bled indigo over the eastern ridge without incident. She exhaled a laugh that steamed the glass. Relief vanished the moment she descended. The square buzzed with chaos. 3 lanterns from the lower alley were missing, stolen sometime after midnight. Their owners stood clutching empty hooks, eyes wild. Kessa's stomach plunged. Even with Tomas's globe now radiant, the village could not afford to lose 3 whole vessels of hope. She raced to the bell tower again, unhooked Tomas's lantern, and secured it in her satchel. Then she headed north, following reports of footprints. The trail led her into pine hills crusted with old snow. By mid-morning, clouds stacked thick on the horizon, signaling the eclipse's arrival. She climbed faster, lungs raw, until she found a collapsed shepherd's hut and heard voices inside, arguing over price and purity of Starlight. Through a crack, she saw 2 men crouched beside a brazier, melting shards of colored glass, the villagers' lanterns. Anger flared, bright as any star. Kessa stepped back, found a limb of fallen fir, and set the smaller end ablaze with a striker. She burst through the warp door, a spinning torch in one hand, Tomas's lantern raised high in the other. "Drop the shards, or I dash this globe and burn the rest," she warned. "No profit in ashes." The thieves startled. One lunged for her, but molten glass spattered his sleeve. He howled and reeled away. The second, eyes flicking appraisal, spoke in a voice edged with greed. "That lantern gleams fair. Give it here, girl, and we'll leave the valley unharmed." Kessa tightened her grip until the glass chafed her gloves. "This lantern belongs to a man whose wife and daughter lie in the churchyard. You'll not touch it." The first thief cursed, but his companion was studying Kessa differently now, noticing the set of her shoulders, the banked fury in her eyes. Perhaps he also heard, as she did, the first eerie hush of eclipse winds sliding down the peaks. Whatever calculation he made, he barked for retreat. In moments, the thieves vanished into trees, leaving cracked globes and cooling slag. Kessa doused the brazier and collected what she could of the ruined lanterns, fragments still glimmering faintly. The sun was already losing color, paling to a wan coin. She tested the weight of her satchel. Tomas's lantern pulsed steady, yet she sensed it would not be enough to fill the eclipse's maw. An idea sparked. If she could coax the last breath of light from the shards, perhaps their collective glow would match a whole lantern. She climbed again, this time towards Starcrest Lookout, a bald knob where the heavens felt fingertip close. Snow blinded her, and the bleached sun rimmed the world in pewter. At the summit, she laid the shards on a flat stone, set Tomas's lantern at the center, and loosed its stopper. Starlight spilled like milk. Then she lifted the shards one by one, angling them so the escaping light refracted through their colored surfaces, multiplying, deepening, weaving into a broad hush of silver. The air smelled of frost and something sweeter like orchard bloom, remembered in midwinter. Kessa spoke to the stars, the way elders once taught children to pray. She spoke of a tailor whose house was too quiet, of neighbors staring at naked hooks, of the valley that had cared for her since birth. She asked for mercy, for warmth, for a single unbroken dawn. The sun reached the edge of totality, thinning to a sliver, and the sky dimmed to indigo noon. In that shuddering twilight, the scattered shards caught the star river above and seemed to drink. One by one, they quivered, brightened, and their fragments welded themselves anew, fusing along glowing seams until 3 intact lanterns stood where wreckage had been. Awed, Kessa restoppered Tomas's globe, gathered the others, and hurried down. The road blurred with rising dark, already confused birds flitted toward nests, and a fox whined, fooled by the premature night. Bells rang, frantic in Ilyara, calling villagers to the square. She arrived as the last arc of sun vanished, plunging everything into an otherworldly dusk. Hands grasped her elbows, voices clamored, had she seen the thieves? Would the lanterns suffice? Kessa pushed to the center where a stone plinth waited, and one by one she placed the rescued globes upon it. Tomas's she set foremost, then she stepped back, heart hammering. The alderman nodded. Dozens of lanterns were uncapped together. Light billowed like breath freed from confinement. Golden, argent, violet, rose. It pooled and coiled, luminous mist racing outward, brushing cheeks, warming cold fingers, easing cramped shoulders. People gasped and began to laugh or weep. Some reached upward as though they could cradle the glimmer. Yet Kessa watched only Tomas, who stood at the back of the throng, coat threadbare, eyes cavernous. Hope touched him last, a halo settling about his grief-bent shoulders. She saw his spine straighten, saw color slip back into his stubbled cheeks. Tears trapped his face, but they were not the hollow tears of earlier months. He pressed both palms over his chest, breathing deeply as though remembering how. Above them, the black disk of moon still devoured the sun, but within the square, lantern light made its own day. Children chased one another through twisting vapor, leaving footfalls of glitter. Old lovers clasped hands anew. The baker vowed free loaves for every house come dawn. The eclipse still ruled the heavens, yet shadows melted from hearts. When at last the sun's edge reappeared and daylight seeped over ridges, the lanterns dimmed of their own accord, empty once more. A hush held the crowd. Then cheers erupted, a storm of gratitude flung skyward. Kessa bowed her head, exhausted, trembling, smiling so hard her cheeks ached. Tomas approached, hat in hand. "Keeper Kessa," he said, voice hoarse, "you protected my light when I could not bear its weight. Today it protected all of us. I have no coin fine enough to repay you." She shook her head. "It was your lantern that mended 3 others. The valley owes you thanks." He looked up at the returning sun. "My wife, Leora, used to say, 'Hope is the only thing that grows larger when shared.' I heard the words, but I never understood them until this hour." From that day, Tomas began stitching again. The following market, he hung bright banners across his doorway, each embroidered with silver threads that caught the sun, reminders of the stars that had guarded him. He joined evening suppers, mended coats for orphaned children, and once every week he climbed the bell tower with Kessa to hoist lanterns into the night. Sometimes they spoke of grief in quiet voices. Sometimes they told jokes that left them both breathless with laughter. The lantern belonging to the Weaver household was always first to fill, as though the stars themselves favored its new-forged resilience. Years later, when the next lantern keeper lifted Tomas's globe, she found etched along its brass collar a single phrase in a tailor's looping hand: "Guard one light, heal many." She asked Kessa, now an alderwoman graying at the temples, what the words meant. Kessa smiled and told a story of a valley cupped in heaven's palm, of a night the sun went out, and of how one lantern keeper discovered that Starlight, once given shelter, could usher an entire village safely through the darkest day.